Welcome to the Startup Grind.
So this month, we're really pleased to have Red Maxwell with us. Red is the Chief Marketing Officer for AvidXchange. AvidXchange is the fastest growing startup currently in the state of North Carolina. They're based in Charlotte. But Red really has a fascinating bio. I'm not going to take a lot of time to read too much of it because we're going to cover a lot of it in the chat. But we're pretty stoked to have Red here with the red hot fintech company, AvidXchange. They were identified by the CB Insights, if you guys follow CB Insights, as closing the largest funding round in North Carolina in 2017. It was over a $500 million raise, and I'm sure it was pretty easy to put together, right, Red? We'll talk about that. So Red is an experienced marketing executive with over 25 years experience in brand building. After serving on the board of directors of AvidXchange, he moved to his current role as Chief Marketing Officer of the Charlotte Financial Technology Company. He's developed major brand introductions for Polo, Revlon, Planners, Lifesavers, Danone Foods, Foster Brewing Company, Wrangler, which is a local company, and LEE Jeans. He's the president and founder of Onramp Marketing. He pioneered the field of talent branding and consulted with Clear Channel, McGraw-Hill Education, and Tiffany and Company. Red worked with Yoyodyne, which was acquired by Yahoo. He helped launch some of the first internet direct marketing programs in history. He's launched online sites and promotions for Hanes, Duke Energy, Sara Lee. I could go on here, but without further ado, please give a big Winston-Salem welcome to Red Maxwell.
Thanks, Peter. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, good.
All right, so Red, we had the opportunity to chat a little bit before tonight's event, and I like to start with kind of how you got started, going all the way back to the beginning. You know, you went to you started in med school, and then you took courses at Harvard, MIT, and Tufts, and ended up being a pioneer at the intersection of art and technology, and then a marketing leader in the tech industry. So that's a pretty cool beginning, right? So tell us a little bit about those early days.
Yeah, like any good entrepreneur, it usually starts with failure, right? I'll let you in on a little secret. I'm Asian. Being Asian, you are expected to have maybe 3 jobs: doctor, lawyer, or engineer. So I was on the doctor route, and you know what? That was going to be a big failure for me. So I decided maybe I should follow my heart instead and roll the dice. You know, life isn't a dress rehearsal. You've only got one chance at it. So I decided to go against my parents' wishes and essentially follow my heart, and business was one of them. And having a background in science, I started dabbling in computer science and applying that with art. So that offered up a ton of opportunity for me, taking on technology, taking on stuff that nobody else was doing, screwing around with it and trying to make money out of it. And that's essentially how I ended up in New York.
Right, and this was in the very early days of the internet, like before the year 2000, right?
Oh yeah, the gray hairs kind of show you. The reason why my CV sounds so long is because I'm freaking old. But that, you know, if you can survive it, it's pretty fun. You can do lots of cool stuff.
So you were kind of attracted to this new thing that computers could do, which was graphic design. A little bit. Tell us a little bit about that, and also how did you meet Seth Godin? So how many of you guys know who Seth Godin is, right? So Seth is like, big marketing guy or a big blogger in the marketing space. So tell us a little bit about that. First of all, how did you first discover that computers could do graphic design, and then how'd you meet Seth?
I was a horrible typist and ran out of whiteout. And at that point, word processing was the huge killer app for computers. And then I started working with Apples in the early days, and then they introduced the Macintosh. So that graphical user interface was absolutely fascinating to me. And wanting to be an artist, aside from being a doctor, that really attracted me to that intersection, again, of art and design. And having dabbled in some of that stuff early on, scanning technologies and sending stuff over a blazingly fast 9600 baud modem on dial-up was just really very, I guess, exotic at the time. But what's really mundane now and accepted now, at one point was very exotic and new. So that's kind of the thing that I've managed to try to keep doing and keep driving and surfing the wave of what's coming rather than mining what's already been here.
So, so you started playing around with these things. How did you meet Seth? How did that happen?
Seth went to school with me. He was a few years ahead of me at Tufts University, and before he went off to Stanford and write books and stuff like that, he helped me come up with my first tagline for my business. And I was opening up a graphic design business in Boston, and in those days, as a one-man shop, what do you want to do? You want to look bigger and more serious than you really are. So he said, why don't you do it tongue-in-cheek? And his tagline for my company was, serving Greater Boston's graphic needs since last Tuesday. Loved it. The other thing about that, too, Seth was ahead of his time in terms of search engine marketing. There was no search engine at the time. What it was for a search engine was the yellow pages that the telephone company put out. And in order to rank high on that analog search engine ranking, what you would do is have to pick a name that was alphabetically advantageous. Start with an A. So the name of my first company was Aardvark with 2 A's on it.
So you did real well in the page rankings, right?
Yeah, we did.
Climbed right up the yellow pages, right? So
yeah, we did. And I ended up running into Seth later when he was at Yoyodyne, before he sold it to Yahoo, and we helped develop some of the first internet sweepstakes and games. Really, what can we do with interactive technologies that were real time, and really do that online. And it was kind of scary because no one had ever done it before, but that was part of the draw.
So that kind of leads to a thread that I think carries through your entire career, which is that you told me that contacts are king. That was one of the phrases you repeated in our pre-interview, and relationships, right? So from a learning standpoint, obviously the startups that really work hard on their networks and their contacts tend to be the ones that succeed. I showed a slide earlier that the top 5 factors that influence startup success. Startups think that the number 1 factor is money, but actually the number 1 factor that influences startup success is timing. Being in the right place at the right time with the right idea, not being behind the market or too far ahead of it. But to get there, you've got to have a lot of relationships and a lot of contacts. So talk a little bit about how that helped your business develop in the early days.
Yeah, absolutely. You always learn from the folks that you surround yourself with, but I think the maxim that I've lived with is something I learned from my father-in-law, who never went to college, but one of the wisest guys I know. And what he said about networking was this: it's not who you know, it's how you use who you know. So it's not just enough to get out there and to meet the people, but you have to keep a catalog on your mind on how can this person help you, how can this person help your business, and on top of that, flip it around too, because how can you help people within your network? Within karma, what goes around comes around, right? So utilizing that network allows you to get to the timing because you'll end up learning from folks who have been there before or being able to tap into their experience when you need it the most.
So you moved here in 1989, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And you bought the Design Factory, which was a packaging company?
Yeah, back in those days, that was right after the KKR buyout of RJR. And the founder of Design Factory worked in the in-house design group at RJ Reynolds. And when he took his retirement package, he essentially flipped around and used that as seed money for starting a business and doing a lot of the international packaging design, starting with RJR. And I came down from Ralph Lauren, where I was working, and came down to North Carolina and invested in that business.
Right, and then that led to Onramp Marketing. So I'm trying to fast forward. There's a lot to cover here, but
Yeah.
Onramp Marketing was and is or was?
Onramp branding still exists.
Okay.
My partner and some of my past employees ended up taking over that company as I moved on to my role currently with AvidXchange. So after investing in one business, I got a hankering to bootstrap my own, just start it from the beginning, and that's why Onramp branding came to be. And Onramp branding was actually one of the agencies for AvidXchange, and that's how I ran into this company.
Right. So that's the connection there. And another set of connections here is Onramp did all the marketing for the Silk Road technology companies. And for those of you that don't know that, that's another story for another day. But Silk Road produced quite a lot of technology companies here in Winston-Salem, and in fact is still producing technology companies here in Winston-Salem. Flip Filipowski, who was a primary investor in Silk Road, is a partner with Flurry, which is one of the startups based here at Flywheel, and they're getting ready to bust open.
Yeah, exactly. And Flip was essentially my partner at AvidXchange, and I served as chief marketing officer for some of the other technology companies that he either started up or purchased and grew.
So that led to Avid, which is kind of what we really want to talk about, because everything that we talked about before comes into play in the Avid story, right? So tell us what AvidXchange does, right? It's not it didn't just spring up in the last couple of years. It was started in 2010. Is that right?
Actually, AvidXchange is what I call a 17-year-old startup.
Okay.
It started in 2000.
Okay.
And the business started with essentially business bidding and auctions, and then shifted to doing managing payments and the invoice process for companies. Now that was a hell of a pivot, but that's because whenever you start, you have a great business plan, you start getting the right people, and before you know it, it's you go to market and it's like, the market doesn't like this. So what do you have to do? You have to start to change and start selling and making what the market needs and wants. So what the market needed and wanted at the time, and is now still coming into being, is helping pay bills. As consumers today, we rarely ever write paper checks or pay by paper checks. It's a very manual process. Businesses, however, are still stuck with it because different people, different departments have to approve the invoices and bills as they come in, and then it has to be placed into the accounting system, and then you have to write a paper check. The majority of checks made by, or payments made by businesses today are still with paper checks, highly antiquated. And what AvidXchange does is it takes care of these commercial payments and automates the AP process and the payments process. So you can imagine with how electronic payments has taken on for consumers, how it is a huge opportunity right now for AvidXchange and companies like it.
So interestingly, so that was kind of largely a manual process, right? Even when the company started in the year 2000. And you guys hit an inflection point in 2010, which is why that year stuck in my head. And this is actually kind of similar to another company we have here, Inmar, which went through a similar experience of translating from the analog to the digital world, and then hitting a similar inflection point when something happened in 2010. So talk about that.
Sure. So 2010 was when we took the second bite of the apple. So let me explain. So the first product that we had was managing the invoice and the approval process and digitizing all the bills as they came in. That's great. We started making money on those at a transaction level. That means every time a bill came and you processed it, you would pay us a fee. In 2010, we heard from some of our customers saying, hey, can you just take this all the way through? Because once it's on our accounting system, I still need to pay it and I still need to write a paper check. So we took a second bite of the apple and created another product and service where we will handle the payments and also convert a bunch of them into electronic payments. So that was our second big bite of the apple.
And then cloud computing came on and really kind of kicked the opportunity to a whole new level. So how did the cloud kind of influence Avid's opportunity in the market?
In 2000, we started as a SaaS business, software as a service or cloud. So when I first ran into AvidXchange back in the mid-2000s, a lot of the marketing, a lot of the messaging had to deal with, it's okay that you're not getting a shiny CD in a box. It's going to be out here on the internet. Trust us, it's better. Now, we all know that's turned out great, right? Just like, computing for graphic design. But at the time, that was, again, very exotic, and now it's the norm.
So off script a little bit, you started working with Avid at Onramp, and then you decided to actually go with the company. And I assume you were serving on the board of directors while you were still doing Onramp, right?
Yeah, so let me tell a little bit about it. At that point, the startup was still really, really tiny and couldn't afford my services at Onramp full-time. But at the time, I was like, I love these founders. I love what they're doing. How can I help them and coach them along and mentor them along? And they offered me a seat on the board. At that point as well, I was serving as head of marketing for a couple other software companies. One of them was one with Silk Road Technology. At the time, it was at about 12 million in annual revenue, and AvidXchange was dwarfed by that revenue. Now it's flipped. AvidXchange has surpassed every other software company that I've worked with.
So, so you had visibility, and you were actually helping the company grow. So what were some of the big marketing challenges early on? This is another off-script question, but what were you faced with when you stepped off the board and took over the CMO role? You probably found out some things you didn't totally know about, and were faced with some new challenges. What were the challenges of getting AvidXchange to the level where it could close on the biggest, investment raise last year?
Yeah, sure. So when you take a look at a rocket ship, it's one thing. You're like, wow, that's going really fast. Once you actually belt yourself in and get on there, then you really feel the G-forces. And that's the difference from going from like a board level where you can understand what's going on with the industry versus seeing what it takes to really get those engines revving and humming. One of the things that was a challenge as well was not just SaaS being accepted. it was awareness from a very conservative audience. So you can imagine AvidXchange sells to a financial audience, CFOs, controllers, and AP managers. If we were selling to an IT audience or a CIO, they are rewarded for taking a look at cutting edge and progressive and innovative solutions. Finance, that audience is rewarded for being conservative, for making sure you stay with the tried and true. So even though paper and manual is slow and boring and just inefficient, they don't normally, this audience doesn't normally look for innovation. So we had to put it out there and educate that this was not only better and more efficient, but safer because there's less risk of security and fraud with electronic payments versus checks, as well as having the ability to find everything at a click of a mouse rather than looking through tomes and file cabinets of old paperwork.
So I'm a little bit envious here, I must admit, because Brad Feld is on the board of directors of AvidXchange, and he happens to be basically the guy that wrote the playbook that we're following here at Flywheel to try to stimulate a startup community. So tell us about the board of directors at AvidXchange, because I think for the startups in the room, you know, it's really important to thoughtfully build your board, because it can help you succeed and get to the next level more than probably anything else. So tell us a little bit about your experience as a board member and also working for the board.
Sure. Yeah, so Brad Feld is part of our smart money and part of our brain trust.
So tell them who Brad Feld is.
Yeah, so Brad Feld, first follow his blog on feldthoughts.com. He is one of the founders of the incubator for
Techstars.
Yes, Techstars. Thank you. And he's based in Boulder, Colorado. You talk about networking. Our CEO actually networked and had met Brad back in the day when they were both up in Boston, and essentially tapped that relationship 20 years later. The first big round that AvidXchange brought on, it was to the tune of about $225 million in 2015. That was led by Bain Capital Ventures. Some of the brains that came along with Bain Capital Ventures is Matt Harris, who's a well-known figure in financial technology or fintech. Along with that round was Brad Feld, Nigel Morris, who is one of the co-founders and the former president of Capital One, one of the fastest growing companies and banks to ever get to the Fortune 500. And Nigel Morris with NICA, who is not any relation to Nigel Morris, but was former president of Visa and helped take it public. So me stepping down off the board actually was a big boon for AvidXchange to bring on that level of horsepower. This last round, which was a $300 million round, brought along with it Colleen Taylor, who is with MasterCard and has a rich history in banking, as well as Nicholas Westphal from CDPQ. That is it's Caisse de dépôt et placement du Québec, which is it's an institutional investor and runs the retirement funds for a lot of the public employees in Canada. And then Temasek, which is the Singapore National Sovereign Fund. So from a funding perspective, we looked at not only getting the money, and we had to turn money away, but we were looking at smart money. I forgot Peter Thiel, also one of the co-founders of PayPal, came on with the last round as well. So we look for the right partners to invest, and we look to make sure that we're getting in investors who are willing to serve on the board and that we can tap their brains as well as their financing.
So I can't help this, but the majority of the people you just named were at the Startup Grind annual conference. Just had to put that in there. So, and by the way, you slipped in a little foreign language there. So how many languages do you speak? Because I heard you speak Spanish, French.
Well, I was born in the Philippines, so I speak Tagalog, but I came over when I was 5, so I have a 5-year-old vocabulary. I speak some Spanish, a little bit of Japanese, and French.
Okay. So,
Enough to get in trouble, but enough to be able to order something when I'm at a restaurant or get back with a taxi back to the hotel.
so tell us a little bit more about these fundraising experiences, because this is an experience that not a lot of us have had in the room. Who here has raised a $300 million Series B round? Raise your hand. Okay, so not a lot of us have been through this. So what's it like? I mean, what can you share with these guys that would help them, should they have the opportunity to get ready for that?
There's one other board member that I didn't mention, and his name is Steve McLaughlin. Steve McLaughlin is our partner and investment banker. We were lucky when I was on the board to recruit him over to even get on his radar, and he is incredibly connected in the fintech and the investment circles. So having someone in your camp that can help connect you to the money is super important, and to help you understand what steps to take to raise that money properly is incredibly valuable.
Okay, so last question, then we'll open it up to the audience. So if you were to give the startups in the room a couple of really great pieces of advice about what to do and what not to do, what would it be?
Surround yourself with the right people. And that includes the investors. The 4 pillars that we look at AvidXchange in order to make the business run is you have to make sure you have the right strategy. You have to make sure the execution is really looked at. The people and money is oxygen. The money is the capital, and that's the oxygen. So as a business owner, as a CEO, one of your key roles is to make sure you have enough oxygen for your business.
So before we go on, to the audience, one thing that I skipped was you told me you hired 400 people last year?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what's that like?
Crazy. And not only getting all those folks on, making sure they're all seated and they have all the tools that they need and are onboarded properly. Let me tell you, some of the secret sauce that made AvidXchange viable and successful, we knew that had to be maintained and preserved. And the way you do that, when you add that many bodies to your business, is to pay close attention to culture. Some of the things, the discipline that we had, the rhythms that we had of our meetings, our core cultural values, we really looked at and made sure we communicated and continually reinforce. When you add that many people, you have to make sure they know what it takes, what is expected in order to succeed and be part of the team.
So culture kind of sets the norms about this is how we behave at this company, this is what the expectations are, and it's like the glue that holds the whole thing together when you're going through rapid growth, right?
Yeah, there's a maximum that says culture eats strategy for lunch.
Right.
So what does that mean? I'll give you for instance. We acquired a company, and on paper, strategically, this looks like a no-brainer. But if we were having problems with the leadership, the founders of that company, we weren't going to be able to monetize or take advantage of the technology that we had just purchased. If culture is aligned, then you can unlock all that potential.
Right, and it's about why you're doing what you're doing, right? There's a great TED talk about this, about...
That's Simon Sinek.
Right. If you can ask any CEO and say, what do you do? How do you do it? And then you ask them why are you doing it, and you get a blank stare, right? So the companies that really understand the why and the sense of purpose are able to instill that sense of culture.
Yeah, that's
and-
really
and
part
hold
of
it
the
together.
operating system or business operating system that we have in place. Actually, we utilize a company called Rhythm Systems, and essentially they take it through a think, plan, and do level of planning for all their executive coaching. The thinking part is all your strategy. Why are you in business? What is your value proposition and your business promise? What are your cultural values? Those things that don't change between 3 and 5 years. And then you go through annual planning and quarterly planning, and we have the discipline at AvidXchange where the executive team meets weekly. So each functional head raises what's important and what obstacles they may be facing, and if she needs help from somebody else. So those are great ways to make sure that as you scale up, that you have those habits in place to be able to really take advantage of growth.
Okay, so I want to turn it over to the audience now. So remember, this is your job, right? Task number 2, do you guys have any questions? All right, Mike, get us kicked off here.
All right, thanks. I've known Red for 20 plus years, probably. So this is, if you don't mind sharing some personal stuff, as incredible as all this sounds of what he's done with his career, 2 of the best mom and dads I know. And luckily my daughter was a big friend of his daughter back in school. But if you don't mind sharing, I think what's incredible with all he's done, like a lot of us have within our families, his daughter had some real illness. And if you don't mind sharing that personally, my hat's just off to you of what you've done personally and what you and your wife have done with juvenile diabetes, along with all the business accomplishments you've had, because it's an incredible story.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. Yeah, in order to be able to take care of your business, you have to make sure you have a really strong foundation and basis back home. That's where you draw all your energy. That's where you draw your fuel. And without the partnership of my wife and without her support, I couldn't have taken any of this stuff on. The work that I've done with JDRF, which is the leading type 1 diabetes funder in the world, I've served on local boards, I've served on the international board, and now I'm a chancellor. That passion has fueled me to try to help ease and cure this disease for both my daughter and my wife who suffer from this disease. And it's been incredibly enriching. Serving on the board taught me a lot of lessons on how to be a good board member for AvidXchange. It exposed me to other executives who I've seen how they operate and how they think that I've taken back with me and apply in my job. So again, you may be helping something or helping a cause, but it's amazing what you take out of it as well. It's a virtuous cycle.
Thanks, Red, for that story. You talked about how the company grew by virtue of exploiting trends in the industry, improving technologies, getting a great board, networking. But what role did marketing play in the recent tipping point, this change in the company?
Yeah, marketing is about getting the story out there, right? And making sure that there's awareness of whatever you're selling. And understanding that when you talk to one audience, it bleeds over to another. So the news about our funding, the news about our investment rounds caught a lot of eyes and created a lot of attention on us. The smart people who invested in us were essentially giving an endorsement saying, this is the right horse to ride. And from a marketing standpoint, using that momentum to get into our target audiences and echoing that became a huge tool for me to increase awareness within our target markets. Oh, and one other thing. When we built our new building on our campus, we got the naming rights to the music factory in Charlotte. Getting the music rights for a place that's letting you know when English Beat or if Justin Bieber is coming into town, what happens is when you hear ads on the radio for the AvidXchange Music Factory, it helps raise awareness locally. Even though we do business nationally, what that did was it raised the awareness with the talent pool that we could bring in for the region, to let programmers who are working within all of North Carolina know that AvidXchange even existed and where we were. So that was a huge coup as well, getting the naming rights to a property like that.
So I'm actually coming to entrepreneurship from a desire to create a larger positive social impact, and so it's just really fascinating stepping in at different levels. It's something I never thought I would be doing in my life, and so I'm curious about when you take on something this big, what, if anything, is that deeper why of what the legacy this could possibly bring or the positive impact? Because I recognize that is at the heart of entrepreneurship. We're not just, doing this to generate wealth. There's a solution that we're creating, and there's also that frees up folks to do other things. But I'm just curious for you if there's some deeper personal legacy or social impact that you have a desire to create through this huge offering to the world beyond just the initial jobs, et cetera.
Yeah, what's interesting is, it seems huge now, and we assumed it was huge when we got into the business, but you think about one of the things that we want to do is we want to connect the community between buyers and their sellers and solve this problem that they've got. If you are putting the customer at the center and you do your work with heart to try to solve that problem for them, I mean, that's the why, right? We're all connected, and if we can tap that community and solve a problem for them, again, it's a virtuous cycle that ends up rewarding you. If you have something, if you've created something of value, then it's a big win-win and you solve problems for them. So one of our investors with QED, he worked with Nigel Morris, came up with this when he was taking a look at us. He said, I get pitches from startups all over the place, and all they do is they offer me silver bullets. This one thing is going to solve this. This one thing is going to solve this, and it's huge. It's a huge magic silver bullet. He said, what I love about AvidXchange is for 17 years, you guys have been toiling, trying to unknot a really gnarly and unglamorous problem. But we solved that problem, and we continue to solve it, and we continue to make it better and expand the offering.
Paying bills allows you to focus on what.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hey, so as someone that's been on the agency side and on the CMO side, maybe talk about what challenges do CMOs face, or are you facing as a CMO, promoting, marketing your business, as well as, how has the things you learned on the agency side kind of helped you and vice versa, as just hypothetically asking for a friend how an agency might work with CMOs better?
And having been on the agency side, the thing that was neat about being on the agency is that you solve different problems for different kinds of businesses. However, some of those problems rhyme. And what you can do is apply learning from one to the other and bring in that creativity in novel ways. Sometimes when you're just within your role, waking up every day just thinking about that one marketing problem for your one industry, you end up making decisions in a vacuum. And having that ability to have that outside perspective is important to have. And being able to bring that in is an important thing to have. From a CMO standpoint, the definition of a CMO changes. And it's changed dramatically over the last 30 years. There was an article in the Harvard Business Review about that because different CEOs have different expectations of their CMO. Some are looking for people to manage the brand. Some are looking to be an adjunct to sales and generate demand, and it becomes more data science. Others are turning to CMOs for overall product strategy and in terms of how it fits into the marketplace. It becomes a big juggling act. At the end of the day, though, at this level, it's managing the people who have those really specialized skills and enabling them to reach their potential and to bring their full selves into the business.
I'm curious, as a marketing officer and somebody that's active in mid-sized corporations, how much impact you're seeing from social media and its impact on how you talk to the market, how you listen to the market, and how much influence it might have on who you're doing business with as a customer.
Yeah, so social media, especially, this is a business-to-business problem that I'm solving. So being on Facebook doesn't make sense for us. And we've experimented on Facebook. LinkedIn seems to be a little bit better. There are other communities like Capterra that we've looked at as well. You can't ignore social media because that becomes the voice of the customer that's readily seen by everybody in the world. So if you deliver a product or service and you do it in a crappy way, someone is going to grouse about it on a review site, and you have to be able to respond. What's the best way to respond? Well, don't screw up in the first place, right? But turning a blind eye to it or turning a deaf ear to it, one, doesn't allow you to change and learn from it to produce a better product, but to actually engage with someone in the public forum and show that you care in a public way.
When you hit the inflection point, or right before it, actually, that's probably more important. You're talking about demand generation. You're talking about customers, buyers, and sellers. How much did you learn from them that contributed to when you hit that point? When you knew that, okay, we're really on to something here. We're hitting markets we had never hit before, or we're meeting needs that we had never met before, and this thing is really starting to take off. Was it gradual? Was it something that just hockey stick?
It's gradual in some places. So, for example, we have a large concentration of happy customers in the real estate business. And you know what? Real estate financial professionals, they talk to each other. However, if I'm trying to reach a healthcare, for example, and they don't know us, that becomes a harder row to hoe. So being able to, invest the right amount to break into new territory and make sure that the product and solution fits their needs is a really important thing. And then you can start taking advantage of some of that momentum as, awareness and advocates start popping up to say, hey, you should take a look at it. Because, as very sophisticated consumers these days, we don't trust what marketers say, but we trust what our peers say, right? So depending on what micro target you're looking at first, get some great fans there and pick a micro target that likes to talk, and then that can really help you gain fast ground. Hope that helps.
You have to do this, like really.
I've been involved with technology for decades, and I look at a startup company and I wonder, how can you stay a course when things change so quickly? We talk about blockchain and artificial intelligence, and you've got your startup going, full force in one direction, and all of a sudden there's new technologies and things popping up. How do you deal with that?
Sure. I will quote Peter Kay from Xerox PARC. He said the best way to determine or figure out what the future is to create it. So be the disruptor rather than look for disruptors. We continue to try to be a disruptive force by, again, getting rid of manual processes wherever we see in payments. So the other part of it personally is to remain curious. That's incredibly important to be a lifetime student. I learn a lot. I call myself a middle-aged millennial sometimes because I really learn a lot from my younger staffers who are coming on board, and I prescribe to a practice called reverse mentoring. And being open to that and having the humility to step aside from your own pride and say, maybe I'll be able to learn something from you, can serve you well.
So, final question. One of our startups that went through our accelerator program this year is in the field of sentiment analysis for small businesses. There's quite a lot of sentiment analysis platforms that serve Fortune 500s and that type of thing, but not a lot that are serving the small and mid-sized business market. So do you use any sentiment analysis tools? You were talking about social media earlier, and that's where the customer conversation is happening. So what tools do you use to track what customers are saying about you, and what kind of analytics do you do with that information?
We add new ones every day. And when I took over the marketing leadership role at AvidXchange, there were 4 people in the marketing department. Now we're on pace to have 30 people on staff. And we look at not only new tools, but adding new skills and new processes as we take a look at taking advantage of the opportunities. So certainly, some of the things that have served us really well from a deep data analytics standpoint is investing in our CRM. We use Salesforce. We really leverage our marketing automation tools a lot to run our campaigns. And then we study that data to see where we're winning, where we're losing, and track how the leads that we create actually end up in winning sales. And taking a look at that very, very closely. Now it helps for us because from the demand generation engine, the marketing team at AvidXchange contributes significantly to our overall sales. Over 50%, close to 60% of all new deals come through our marketing efforts. So we take a look at all the data to see what's creating that. Inbound channels, some of the content that we're creating, the events that we attend, and looking at deeper and deeper analytics so we can do attribution modeling, because we know doing one marketing motion isn't going to create a sale or lead. It takes several. So getting more sophisticated with understanding what's happening, what our marketing investments are really yielding is super important.
Can you share just real quickly some of the tools that you really love?
Yeah, we've been using HubSpot a lot, and Salesforce we utilize tremendously. That's a big part of our That's where all our knowledge and data comes from. But it takes not only investing in the technology, but ascribing to the process. Garbage in, garbage out. If the sales folks aren't putting in the data correctly, if they are not creating the opportunities, it's hard to make heads or tails out of it.
I feel that pain. All right, Red, thank you. Give a big hand for Red.